Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome, welcome, welcome. I see that more folks are joining us. My name is Richie Nunez. I'm the events and media coordinator here at Outco. I just want to thank you so much for joining us this evening. I'm going to start presenting the slides here. Before we get started, and as more people are rolling in, where are folks calling in from? I have David on the line with me. We're both in the Bay Area. I am in beautiful Oakland. David, where are you calling in from?
Calling in from Berkeley here, not too far away from you, Richie.
Where's everybody else calling in from? Okay, we got Seattle, Washington in the house. What's up, Boston? How's it going, Lena? Thanks so much for joining us. We got Vancouver as well. Houston, Texas. New Brunswick, Canada. I just want to make sure that you all can see my slides here. Can you give me a thumbs up if you can? Or just let me know, David. Awesome. So I'm going to be, I'm not sure for this presentation actually is going in full screen mode. I'm trying to pull up the notes here. So, welcome to the 5 tips for optimizing your technical resume. We are actually going to get started with a poll. I just want to kind of get a gauge for the room. Who here is currently a job seeking software engineer? Are you currently on the job hunt? Are you not job hunting, or maybe not yet, maybe considering it in a little bit? Please let us know just so that we can get a better understanding of who's here with us this evening. I'm just going to take this quick little poll and just share those results with you. It looks like 6 of you currently are job seeking, and 4 of you, or at least one of you, not yet, but 3 of you are going to be considering that. Uh, as far as years of experience, launching poll number 2 here. How many years of experience as a software engineer do you have? Just want to again get a pulse for the room, see who's joining us. Um, and we have more people trickling in. Thank you so much for answering this poll. I'm going to share these results with you all. So it looks like 2 of you have more than 10 years of experience. 2 of you have 3 to 6 years of experience. 1 to 3 years of experience is 3 of you. And then the majority, it looks like, are 0 to 1 year, just getting started with their software engineering career. And I'm actually going to launch uh, the third poll here. If you currently are a job seeking software engineer and you find value in this conversation, you find value in this presentation, and you'd like to join our exclusive Outco Slack community that consists of job seeking software engineers, please select yes here. And I'm just going to leave this poll on and we are going to push on through. So, this is the overview of the event. First and foremost, again, welcome. You could be anywhere else this evening, but instead you're here trying to better your technical resumes, and just want to congratulate you. We're going to be doing a quick introduction to Outco, who I am myself, Richie, and David, who's also on the line here. And then we're going to be doing that for 5 minutes, and then we're going to be having a conversation for 5 tips for optimizing an engineering resume with myself and with David. And then we're going to be ending the event with a Q&A. So just a little bit of background into Outco. Outco is a 4-week job accelerator program built specifically for software engineers. It was founded in 2015 in San Francisco. It's a coaching and skill sharpening service for software developers, and we've helped place over 2,000 software engineers in different positions. Please take a look at our Yelp reviews. Classes are in Eastern Standard Time and Pacific Standard Time, and we have a bunch of free resources that are available. If you ever want to come check out a technical whiteboarding demo, we have that available. We have a Spotify technical interview question demo coming up. Please take a look at our website, and we have a bunch of our events listed on there. I myself, again, am the events and media coordinator here at Outco. I also manage the alumni community. And I've managed over 50 events here for Outco, having to do with software engineering negotiation, resume optimization, whiteboarding, and the whole gambit, really. And I'm going to pass over the mic actually over to David.
Hello, everybody. I was going to say, Richie, these photos here, I'm much younger in many of these, but welcome everyone. Great to be having you in here this evening. My name's David, one of the co-founders here at Outco, and Richie, if you want to go back there, I can. One of the coaches here at Outco, been doing this now, effectively since the very beginning, right? So it's been a little bit over 5 years now. And one of my core focuses here at Outco in terms of working with software engineers, amongst a number of things, one of the core focuses has been resumes during that period of time. And I would likely say I've probably written over 1,800 technical resumes, so a lot. And then in addition to that, technical resumes within software engineering domain across a few different disciplines here. So as you can see in the slide there, written resumes for front-end engineers, back-end, full stack, mobile, so that could be like Android or iOS. I've done resumes for machine learning engineers, data engineers, DevOps folks, SRE resumes, so a number of them. So I've had the opportunity to have a lot of conversations with a lot of different engineers from a lot of different backgrounds, which has helped to direct a lot of the thoughts that I bring to the table when it comes to helping folks rebuild their resumes as a means to get more interviews.
Awesome, David. Thank you so much for that introduction. And without further ado, we're going to be going over the 5 tips for optimizing your technical resume. And I know that we have 3 resumes to go over. And if we have time, we're going to be going over the ML resume as well. Is that correct, David?
Yep.
Awesome. So I'll go ahead and stop sharing here and turn it over to you.
Alrighty, everybody. So thank you, Richie, here for the introduction. And part of what I would like to spend the time we've got together this evening is thinking through effectively like 5 tips for optimizing, all of your all's technical resumes. And before we dive into that, though, I think it's important to think about too, what is the purpose of a resume, or what do we think like the purpose the resume serves in the job search? If y'all want to type into the chat, kind of interested to learn from everybody here before I provide my own thoughts on what I feel the purpose of a resume is. What do we think? Maybe we don't have thoughts here, at least in terms of what the purpose of a resume is. But effectively what it is a tool for all of you to effectively market yourselves for different software engineering roles. An opportunity to really effectively position yourself for particular positions that you're aiming for, and then working to make sure that your resume actually gets picked up out of the pile here. Oh, here we go. I'm starting to see everything. Sell your skills, better chance to get to the next stage of the interview. Virtual appearance for job application. Yeah, I would agree with a lot of the points that are here. But yeah, really, it's an opportunity to sell your experience, your skill set in a way to try to get your resume picked up. So you have the chance to talk with companies and interview. And additionally, part of what I feel the resume is a great tool for doing too is providing an opportunity for everyone to start to think through accomplishments that they've had before in the past as it relates to past roles that y'all have had, and like what was the value that you delivered. Because in thinking through a lot of this and like putting it onto paper, 1, you're going to end up with a stronger resume, but 2, you'll be brainstorming through different past engineering stories that you've got. And then when you start to get asked inevitably questions, experience-based questions around what you've been up to before in the past, interesting technical challenges that you've solved, or maybe potentially get asked like times that you failed at work, you've already done the work of actually brainstorming through and thinking about what it is that you've done before in the past and are ready to share their stories more top of mind here. All right, so what I want to do here is walk through some before and after resumes for that I've worked on before in the past that are focused on engineers at varying stages of their career. And so the resumes that we're going to look at right now, as Richie was mentioning, three different ones. First one I'm going to look at here is new grad resume before and after. Second one we're going to check out is bootcamp resume. So like folks that have gone through some form of accelerated curriculum to help them get into software engineering. So bootcamp resume before and after. And then the last one we're going to walk through is experience engineer. I think the resume at hand, I think has about 20 years of experience. So very experienced engineering resume before and after. And as we're walking through that, part of what we'll be talking about too are those like 5 tips that we were mentioning that we're going to learn about and how those appear in the resumes themselves. So I'm going to share my screen now, and let's pull up that new grad resume.
And while you're doing that, David, I just wanted to encourage everyone who is attending. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop it in the Q&A function here on Zoom. I'll be taking a look at the questions and integrating them into the conversation as we go along.
Awesome. All right, everyone can see this, right? I can't see the chat anymore, so I'm going to just
Looks
assume that's
good.
a yes. All right, so we're going to look at first is new grad resume before and after here. And this is resume before. And the first tip that we're going to be talking about or walking through at the moment is listing our technologies, really making sure that we clearly list out technologies that we know, that we've worked on before, that we can use, and making sure that that's very obvious in our resume. More specifically, we want to make sure that, a lot of times we're going to be applying to like directed positions. So say, for example, if you're like a full stack JavaScript developer, you're going to want to have those technologies clearly listed out onto your resume. If you're a Python backend developer, or if you're a, Java enterprise developer, whatever it is, right? Making sure that we have those technologies clearly listed out so that if somebody's looking for a resume that has that particular set of skills, it's very easy to find that. And so when we're starting to look at this new grad resume here, what we notice here right off the bat, right? If I'm a recruiter, hiring manager, just quickly sifting through this, is that I can't find technologies that are on here, at least not immediate towards the top, front and center, easy to find, right? So as we start to scroll down, oh, I see, right? Here they are listed towards the bottom here. But if I'm like quickly sifting through resumes, and there's been studies that have been done before in the past that effectively demonstrate that recruiters are spending about 7.5 or so seconds that's right, 7.5 seconds looking at resumes as they're sifting through things. You have a very small window, right, to make that first impression here. And in fact, um, yeah, very small window to make that first impression. Now, that's not to say that, your resume in its entirety will only be looked at for 7.5 seconds, but at least in terms of somebody deciding whether or not they're going to give it a longer look, you likely have that much time. And so with that in mind, knowing that we need to really like optimize things to create a strong enough first impression to get those longer looks, tip 1 is definitely making sure that we list out the technologies that we know in a clear manner. And so a piece of that, right, is making sure this is not listed out towards the bottom. Also thinking about like what is our like key core technology that we're most competent in, and making sure that it's likely going to be a language here, so programming language that you're best with, and making sure that that's listed out effectively front and center. So in this particular case, I would be wondering or asking this individual, all right, so what language are you most comfortable with? At least at the start, it kind of looks like it might be JavaScript, just knowing that it's listed at the beginning here. Yet at the same time, they're leading with HTML, which is probably not the thing they're trying to directly get a job in. And yet is the very first thing that if somebody's reading this is going to key in on as they're going through everything. Additionally, as it relates to ensuring that we're listing out our technologies, part of what we want to do as well is actually weave those technologies into the bullet points that we're writing ourselves. And so as we start to look through some of the lines that are here, we can actually see in this particular case, right, that the engineer in hand here, used Angular for optimizing the client's backend dashboard through building this custom CRM, as well as this asset management Java API. In this next line here, we can also see that they equipped a client with a payment processing API that was developed with Python. And then we can see again, using Form.io, NG2 Smart Tables are probably Angular pieces here, right? But again, Angular that's being used, Angular, Docker, Django, Play. So these parts of this resume are actually fairly good in the sense that they're weaving technologies into the bullet points here. But again, it's not entirely clear like what their core competency is, right? Because we're seeing that there's a mix here both between JavaScript related ecosystem pieces, as well as some Java, as well as some Python. So a piece of this too is just making sure that's a little bit more clear on, what their core competency actually is.
I wanted to jump in and ask David, because I feel like it's a question that we get a lot. If you are fluent in multiple languages, right, how is it that you present that? If you're stronger in one than the other, can you go over that?
Sure. I mean, at its most sort of like straightforward level, it's just really, and I'll demonstrate this here shortly in the after resume, but it's really just making sure that you list those technologies or languages, for example, more or less in order of your what you feel to be your strength in it, and then organize associated like frameworks or libraries that you know within that language. So say for example, like your strongest language is Python, right? And then you've got some experience either with using like Django or Flask and like building web apps, for example, that you're listing like Python, and then you've got maybe it's Django that's after that. Maybe some like data related libraries after that. Maybe it's like Pandas, NumPy, SciPy, whatever it might be that you've used, organizing it that way. And then after that, it'd be listing your next strongest language. So maybe you use JavaScript on the front end. So it'd be JavaScript and then its associated frameworks or libraries.
And a follow up question that I have there, I've seen some resumes that are like 3 pages, right? Like, as far as length, what's your recommendation?
Well, Richie, that I guess that jumps ahead a little bit here to one of the other like 5 recommendations that we've got, right? One of them is listing out your technologies, and another one here is trying to just keep everything to one page to the best of our ability. So remembering that we have a short period of time to make that first impression, and likely folks aren't going to be spending that much time really digging into every single line. We want to make sure that we pare down our experience to what we feel is most relevant to the roles that we're trying to get here, and then highlighting that to the best of our ability. So trying to just keep things to one page, knowing that likely that's the amount of attention that we're going to get anyways. That's not to say that that's like a hard rule that we 100% always must follow, and there's always exceptions to things, right? Maybe it's that you're going for a management related position, or maybe you're in like more of an academic role as it relates to maybe some sort of like data or ML piece where you have additional sections that you might want to include, such as like relevant publications that you've got, for example, or some like very relevant project work. So there might be times where that goes over to 2 pages, but in most cases just keeping things to one. All right, so good questions. Thank you, Richie. And so we've got here, right, new grad resume. A couple other things that stand out that we'll talk about more later too, that have been good here is just trying to quantify experiences, right? Trying to have numbers that you weave into the lines to demonstrate the value of the work that you delivered, right? Because a lot of times folks are going to be skimming through your resume, and sure, they're reading through these things that you built with these technologies, but beyond what you've written there, they're going to have very little context as to what all that means. But when you can start to actually like quantify some of the impact that that work had, that's something that folks can visualize, at least mentally here, have like a better understanding on like what it was that you were able to build was actually able to do for the business. And so in this particular case, right, we can see that their work in this first line increased productivity by 30%. We see this other line here, decreased fraud by 80%. So these are all positive pieces of this, at least initial run through of this resume, for getting some quantification pieces in here. And so I'm going to open up, actually, I think now the after for this one. So 1 second here, everyone. Alrighty. So what we've got here is the after for the resume that we were just looking at. And what we can start to see here is a couple things. One, right, we pulled the technical skills section right to the top. And in talking with this engineer, if you remember, when we were looking before at the bottom of the resume, the first thing they're leading with is like front end related technologies, right? They're talking about HTML first, then JavaScript, then Angular. But in actually talking to this engineer, they were communicating to me, actually, I'm best with Python. That's the language that I'm most comfortable with. And not to say that I'm not open to roles elsewhere, but something I would like to use in the next job that I get. So helping them start to organize technologies based on their proficiency, right? So most comfortable with Python, and it's Java here. After that, JavaScript. You can see that we've started to organize them as well based on what is related. So they know JavaScript. They're also familiar with React. So putting that right after JavaScript, this library that's a part of that ecosystem. Then Angular 6, pieces for backend JavaScript development, so Node, Express, and then onto the next language and framework. Additionally, what we can see that we did here for a new grad resume is pulling the education section up. So if you're going for an actual role that's in a larger organization that's specifically targeted toward new grads, would want to have this closer to the top to demonstrate that you actually are eligible for those particular positions. In other situations, that might not be the best strategy because it might be that somebody's looking for someone that has more experience. They might consider someone that recently graduated college, but they were going to really want to know, like, all right, what's the relevant experience that you have? And so rather than having this be the thing that you're leading with, it's leading with professional experience and what you've done there before moving down towards education.
Before, before you keep going down,
Yep.
we actually had a really great question come in from
Yep.
Tanvir. Thank you, Tanvir, for asking a question about quantifying. He says, don't you think not many freshers can actually quantify their work? Like, say, if they worked in a co-op or internship, how do people actually measure their contribution?
That's a great question. I mean, that is actually a question that comes up. Doesn't matter, like, if you're a new grad, experienced in the middle of your career, whatever. I think that's one of the hardest things that folks find doing is actually like quantifying past experiences. First thing that I always let people know is that it doesn't need to be like the exact benchmarked measurement of the impact of your work. Very likely you weren't doing that. Most people don't, right? In some cases that might not be the case. Um, but when you're thinking about trying to add numbers here, it's just like, to the best of your knowledge, what was happening, and you being somebody that was actually working on this particular feature, this particular system, this particular rewrite, whatever it is, you likely have some of the best firsthand knowledge in terms of what it was that was happening beforehand, and then after you built this thing, like what happened, right? Did it improve server uptime, for example? And if it did, like, do you know, like, roughly how often were crashes happening before versus after the fact? um when we think about like increasing productivity, maybe it's that we're optimize or automating like what was used to be a manual system, right? So it's starting to think about, like, all right, we took this data entry process that was taking roughly 2 hours a week, and we turned it into a 5-minute script, right? So then, or a script that runs in 5 minutes. So that's an opportunity then to also think about how we might start to quantify. Or maybe, as we can even see, right, in this particular line, this one's less on actual like performance increase, and more just speaking to order of magnitude of the data that we were working with, right? So in this particular case, we're talking about what, 200,000 assets and 50 tables per database in terms of like migrating data all over into one MySQL database. So there's ways that we can get creative here, like this one too, right? Client acquisition role, talking about maybe like how many new users we were able to bring to a site, or maybe it's like improving user retention. And if you're not entirely sure, like where to start with some of these numbers, part of this too could be talking to teammates that you worked with before in the past, or maybe there's a product owner that you can speak with that might be a little bit more in tune with numbers. So opportunities here to communicate with coworkers as well as you're updating your resume.
I actually wanted to jump in and ask: have you ever seen anybody exaggerate those numbers too much? I mean, is that something that's also possible to do? Is just like it's also important to keep your feet on the ground, and I'm just curious to hear your take on that.
The way I think about this is like, you don't want to just make things up, right? That we're not advocating for that whatsoever. It's like ground things in reality. And if think about it from the perspective of like, if somebody were to ask you like, hey, so I see you were able to increase productivity for clients, by over 30%. That's pretty cool. How'd you do that? Right? That you have a story that you can tell that'll get us roughly to that point. And again, remember, like, that person wasn't there. So they aren't going to know, like, or be fact checking you, like, throughout you telling the story, but you still want to be able to communicate, how it was that you did this particular thing. Um, and then, at least speak to at a high level how it was that you sort of thought this was the productivity increase that you were able to achieve. All right. So as we can see here, new grad resume, as one of those first tips that we're talking about, really making sure that we list our technologies, right? One of our core strategies here, tips for optimizing our resumes. Um, Second tip here, making sure that we are keeping this all to one page, right? The other resume happened to also be one page, which is great, and making sure that this one also maintained that one page limit that we're looking for here. All right. So with that in mind, want to jump into the next resume that we're going to be looking at here. This one is for a bootcamp graduate resume. And remember, after that, we'll be looking at experienced engineer resume, about 20 years of experience. And if we have time, what do you call it? We'll look at a data scientist resume. So let me pull this up.
I have a question here coming in from Victor Liu. Thank you, Victor, for asking the question. I feel like this sort of applies to all sorts of different types of resumes, regardless of experience. It says here, I notice some people use a statement of purpose at the top. Is that useful to include? What are your thoughts on that, David?
Debatable there. The way I see this is that if we have one page for a resume, right, we don't have a ton of space that we're working with. And with that in mind, we want to make sure that we're picking content that we feel is going to be most valuable to telling our story and demonstrating, our core experience, not through like telling people that we can do it, but showing it, right, through actual achievements, projects that we've done before in our past roles. And so I like to think that, like, statement of purpose, for example, it usually takes up like 2, 3, 4 lines there. That can all be told through very clearly listing out our titles for each of our roles, right? So it's very obvious we're a software engineer, for example, rather than us needing to say that we're looking for software engineering roles. And then two, that in starting to look through this, they're going to immediately see, because we're listing our technologies clearly at the top, what our core technology stack is, as well as different projects that we've worked on before, and that it's all very obviously told through clear organization of our content as well as well-written bullet points. And so when I'm working with folks, I generally take that out and I tell them that you can expand upon something like that, like an about me sort of piece on your LinkedIn profile. That's an excellent place for you to have more of an extended version of your work history, but generally try to keep that off of your resume for space concerns, and because all of that will be told through the way that you're going to be organizing and uh, writing through your past experiences. All right. Let me share another resume here. So remember, this one is for a bootcamp resume.
And while you're doing that, I just wanted to launch another poll. If during this conversation and presentation you're finding value, we would absolutely love to see you at an Outco info session. I'm launching that poll there. Which days are you available to join us? Please let us know.
All right. So what we're looking at here now is, remember, we're doing before and after everything. So bootcamp graduate resume. And the next tip that we're going to be talking about here, remember, we've got right now listing out our technologies, keeping things to one page. Next one that I really want to talk about is that relevant experience is paramount. When And what I mean by that is when folks are like looking through your resume, what they're trying to see is like, what relevant experience do you have for the role that you're applying to? And by relevant, we mean like what can be constituted as professional experience. Um, and so knowing that, we want to make sure that, that relevant experience is as clear and easy to find on our resume. So folks aren't wondering if we're actually an engineer, especially if we are, and especially if we are with many years of experience, because that's not going to help our case for getting interview calls. And so as we can see in this particular um, resume, this individual went through Dev Bootcamp. We can see they also graduated college in 2011, chemistry degree. As we're going through this, we can see they've got a summary here sort of describing their transition from science-related role into programming, listing out their projects here. So, I mean, this is good, at least demonstrating that they have some project work that they can talk about. You can see over here on the right as well, um, skills section that they've listed out. Definitely one thing to be considerate of when you're writing your resume is trying to avoid using diminutive like words, diminutive adjectives, as that's going to potentially take away from what it is that you're writing. So when I say that, what I mean is words like small or simple, um, or in this case, like basic, right? Because that's going to color what it is that folks are reading about here. So best to just kind of keep those words out. And if people are going to like draw those conclusions, let them do that on their own. Let's not point them in the direction of them thinking that our work is insignificant, for example, because that's not also not going to help us out. um, we can see here, right, listing out technical skills. Uh, they have some additional sections too, which I think can be helpful as well, like listing out, relevant activities here, things maybe they do that are also interesting. So this showing that they're like involved in like coding hackathons, some athletic activities too that they're interested in. And then we can see here at the bottom too, past employment. That said, though, a couple items as we're looking through this. One, it's not actually clear when they worked in any of this, right? Like we're looking here, laboratory technician for 2 years. All right. When did they do this? Was it last month, 2 years ago, 10 years ago? Like when was all this? Same thing down here for this Alexian Pharmaceuticals role, 6 months, but again, not clear when. So like very unclear timeline, right? Two, as we're considering that one of our tips here for our resume is making sure that, relevant experience is paramount, this individual is applying for, software engineering roles or web development roles, but I don't know if I see the word software engineer appear one time in this resume, right? Or see the words like web developer or web development really appear one time in this resume. And so we're seeing the technology at least, right, that are being weaved into some of the lines, but outside of that, like not clear if they have development experience, which is not going to be helpful when they're applying for jobs. Two, it's very hard to, or three, I should say, very hard to parse through things as well, right? This is like a paragraph they've written, another paragraph that we've written here, another paragraph that we've written. And so it's hard to like actually try to like dive in and parse apart, what it is that they've worked on. So trying to just keep things as we saw with the other resume there, like as bulleted out list items here is going to be helpful for all of you. And, keeping those bullets roughly to like, one line or potentially even 2 lines long, but not more than that. But yeah, and thinking about like just relevant experience and knowing how important that is to you getting your resume picked up, it's not clear what relevant experience this person has. So let's look at the after resume.
Yeah, as I'm looking at this resume in comparison to the other one, I noticed that just even aesthetically, right, we have different positioning of the information, color. Do those things make a difference, would you say, if you have 7 seconds to get someone's attention?
Not necessarily. Like maybe, but at the end of the day, we're not going for like designer positions, right? In which case that might matter. We're going for software development roles. And so with that in mind, it doesn't need to be the like shiniest resume we've ever seen. It does need to be clearly organized, and it does need to be easy to parse through and see like what one's experience is, what have they worked on before, what sort of accomplishments do they have, but it doesn't need to necessarily be super colorful. I think it's debatable if you want to organize it into columns, as we can see here. Right? We have column 1 and column 2. At least personally for myself, I find it harder to read through things quickly. But one thing that this resume is doing a good job of, at least, is making each one of the sections very clearly delineated, right? I know I'm going to find projects here, summary here, skills, education. It's like very easy to sort of see the information and move around. All right, so let me pull up the after. All right, and now we have the after. Very different. Um, So what we can start to see immediately that we've done is one, right? Pulled again, technology section right to the top, try to understand what sort of core technologies this individual has worked with before in the past, what they feel most comfortable with, what they want to be working on in the future. In this case, turned out to be JavaScript related technologies. Two, remember as we were talking about earlier, with experience being such an important part of the resume, like relevant experience, really talking through with this engineer like what sort of relevant experience they had, and then ensuring that as we're putting that on here, it's like we're actually having titles related to their experience. So in this particular case, in talking with this individual, I realized actually that they were doing work for a nonprofit that they just didn't list or talk about, where they were actually doing development work. And so it was organizing that into what it was that they were doing currently, and pulling that into professional experience. And in this particular case, this individual thought, well, like, all right, if I'm not being paid for this, is that something I can put onto my resume then? And the answer to that is most definitely yes. Like if you're doing work for another entity, another organization, you should definitely have that on your resume here, especially if experience is more limited in terms of what it is that you've done before in the past that's related to software engineering. So same approach though, in terms of building out the lines themselves, weaving in technologies. Again, we can see using JavaScript, React, JavaScript, React. Another thing, folks sometimes think that this gets redundant in terms of continuing to relist out technologies or libraries. And yes, it's redundant, but why we do it and why it's important is because we're trying to create a strong impression for someone who's like quickly going through your resume that you know this particular technology stack well. So, say for example, you're a recruiter here really looking for someone who's strong in JavaScript, strong in React. Like, one, you want to see that right away at the top, right? Like, all right, cool, this person knows JavaScript. That's what I need. Where have they used it before now? Right? Would be the next question I might be asking. And so as you're going through the lines, you start to see it continually appear here, right? JavaScript, um, JavaScript again, right? So if I'm not spending a ton of time here looking at things, but still trying to get an impression of whether or not I think this person might be the right fit for the role, the more times I see that, the stronger that impression inherently just going to be as I'm looking through everything. So they've got that repetition in here now. Also, again, keeping this to one page. Um, And as another key element tip for everything, right? For building out your technical resumes. And at this point, we've got listing out our technologies. We've got experience being very much important, paramount. We've got keeping everything to one page. Fourth item here is just making sure that we quantify everything, right? Quantifying content being key. So we've already started to talk about this a bit, but also very much an important part of optimizing your tech resumes. And you can see here that we did that, right? So starting to work with this individual to figure out numbers for each one of these lines, especially numbers in the lines that are going to be in like that most recent experience, which is going to be likely where a lot of the majority of the time that's spent. Most recent experience and the experience before that are going to be where a majority of the time is spent when somebody's like analyzing your resume or even asking you questions about what you've been up to recently. They're likely going to want to know about your most recent role and potentially the role before that. So we've got numbers in here, numbers in here, numbers in here, right? So really working to quantify where we can experience as we were going through the process of rewriting this engineer's resume.
We actually have two follow-up questions in
Yep,
regards to quantifying experience. Natha Chinook asks, could you give an example for how to quantify a front-end task? I know you've seen thousands and thousands of bullet points, David. I'm just wondering if you could give an example on how to quantify a front-end task.
sure. So one way to think about maybe like quantifying a front end task could be like optimizing like UI, for example, right? Or user experience, I should say, optimizing like user experience. And so maybe there you were tasked with, rebuilding like a sign up process or a login process. And maybe the old process was super convoluted and it would take a would-be user like 8 steps, right? To try to like create an account and finally log in and sign up. And so what you did was we're tasked with, rebuilding that whole sign up process with the idea that at the end of that, it would take a user maybe 3 or 4 steps, right? So right there we have our numbers, at least for like a front end task, for example, which could be us, optimizing the user experience here by what, like 50% if we were able to cut it in half in terms of, or optimizing user experience for sign up process by like 50% if we were able to cut that in half in terms of steps that someone might take to get to that point. So that'd be one example of how we might quantify a front end task.
And another follow-up question coming here from Prasanna. Prasanna says, it's quite hard to get these numbers. Most of the time, such numbers are with sales, and developers not really get to interact. How do you work on resolving such scenarios? And I think the question is, how is it that you quantify this experience if you don't have like these hard numbers?
So that's kind of what I was talking about before. A piece of that is thinking through. A lot of times like there might be some sort of presentation, for example. At some point somebody did a presentation like, hey, we're doing this, building this new product line with the goal of increasing revenue by X amount this year, right? And somewhere along the line you had this conversation or sat through this particular presentation, um, or maybe that you're like building some key feature to ensure that you're retaining like the largest customer for your particular company, right? Maybe you don't know like the dollar amount of the contract, but you for sure know that this customer is likely responsible for 20-30% of the revenue of the company, for example, right? Just given the fact that of how big they are. Maybe it's like been dropped before through side conversations with other folks. So a big piece of it is just like sitting down and thinking through like past conversations maybe that you had, or emails that you've gotten before in the past on like why you were doing the thing that you were doing, and then considering if you remember any sort of numbers that might have been around that. Or maybe though, like you don't have hard numbers on what the improvement was, but what you do know is that the user base for the particular app maybe that you're working on is in the hundreds of thousands or the millions or whatever it is. So we could just speak to order of magnitude again in terms of just like how many users might be utilizing this new feature once you build it. That could be our number here too. And it's always okay too to like talk to your coworkers, right? Or manager or old manager, maybe if you're not in that role anymore, and try to get a better understanding of like why you were doing the work you're doing. All right. So this is the after for a bootcamp resume. And The last one that I want to go through that we'll probably have time for is experienced engineer resume. So let me pull that up right now. Everybody, share my screen. All right. And what we can see here is experience engineer resume. And much as before, right? Considering the like tips that we're talking about here for optimizing our resume, one with listing technologies, right? They've got technologies worked into bullet points, which is some of the bullet points, which is good, but not all of them, which is not as good, nor is it clear what their like core technology stack is. I'm guessing it's Ruby on Rails because that's the first thing that my eyes kind of jump to in terms of looking for tech, but it's hard to see. So one thing we can immediately see that's causing some struggle here. Two, in terms of tips here that we've been thinking about, right? Knowing that quantifying is key, there's no quantification, right? We know that they improve customer value and ease of use, but we don't know by how much, right? We know they helped improve budgeting app security and reliability, but again, by what degree, we're not entirely certain. So an opportunity here, right, based on the way things are being written, that to add some numbers, knowing that this person realized that the work they were doing was creating value, but not entirely clear here. Two, or I say three, in terms of our tips here. So listing technologies, quantification, um, relevant experience being very much paramount here. In looking through the resume, as we start to look at this, their titling is a little bit confusing, right? Knowing that we're looking for maybe a senior engineer in this particular case, and then maybe this resume was submitted for a senior engineering role. The most recent title they have is remote contract web application developer. Right? So a bit of a mouthful here in terms of uh, titling. And two, it's just kind of confusing. The next title here, right? Co-founder and consultant. So I'm like, all right, what does that mean exactly? Co-founded a company, that's cool. Consultant though, like what does that mean? What was the work though that you were doing here? Especially given that this was a 2.5 year period of time, and your most recent role was 2 years long, right? So has it just been that you were programming the last 2 years? Before that, you didn't code at all for 3 years, and then in the role before that one, even right, technical owner, whatever that means. And so then as we start to go back even farther, now we're 8 years ago, then we start to see more clear titling. Okay, senior developer, senior software engineer, that makes sense. Lead programmer, lead developer, okay, that makes sense. Lead programmer again, programmer. But again, the titling is a bit confusing. So really making sure, right, that relevant experience is clear here. In remembering that we're trying to keep things to one page, this resume is almost 2 full pages, and some of these roles are going back 21, 23 years ago. So some of this is very much likely outdated in terms of legacy technology that's not really being used all that much anymore. Um, and then the last tip that we want to be talking about today, that fifth one, is just being specific as it relates to like our bullet points here, trying to tell a story. So really making sure that our bullets are clearly describing the work that we did, what technologies we used to do that work, and then what the impact of that work was. So effectively, when we're helping folks rewrite resumes here at Outco, a piece of that is trying to make sure that each bullet point contains three key things, which is a task, action, and result, right? And the way, again, that you can think about these is the task is what you did, the action is how you did it. So what technologies you use? Was that JavaScript? Was that Python? Was that Java? What libraries maybe we're using? And then the result, going back to that quantification, is why did you do the work, or like what was the impact of the work once it was done? And so in this particular case, as we're looking through this, it's just the lines are a little unclear. Like improve customer value and ease of use by merging and improving courseware platforms. It's like, like, what does that mean? How'd you do that? Right? How did you improve? Like, how much was the customer value improved? Or like, how much easier could they use this product? What does this mean? Merging and improving courseware platforms. What are the courseware platforms? Like, to what end are you doing this in the first place? So, an opportunity here to rewrite these lines to really clearly describe the work that was being done. All right, so I'm going to share the after here on this resume.
And while you're pulling that up, David, we have some really great questions here in the chat that are coming up. Prasanna asks, for senior roles, question one, is it frowned upon or considered a negative point if applying for developer roles? Do companies consider that a senior associate to map out their lead roles? And question two, do certifications matter? Again, for senior certifications like enterprise architecture or development certifications like AWS.
I'll answer that second one first because the first one I need to sort of clarify my head that question that's being asked. Certifications matter, kind of. Like if you have space for it on your resume, that can be one of those additional sections that you add in. But I don't think that's going to make or break whether or not someone's going to talk to you. Like it can be a helpful talking point once you get on the phone with someone. If they're asking you, for example, like what sort of experience you have with AWS, and you can speak to certifications that you've gotten recently or in the recent past. But it's not going to necessarily decide whether or not someone's going to like pick up your resume and speak with you. That's a lot of that's going to be predicated on your relevant experience and relevant technology stack for the role that someone's trying to hire for. And then to question one, is it frowned up or considered a negative point if applying for developer? Do companies consider that a senior associate to map to lead? I'm not entirely clear on what that question is. Prasanna, if you want to rewrite that as I start to go through this resume, I could try to answer that here. All right, so let me share this last resume, the after here. All right. And so much as before, we have the after resume in terms of after spent time working with this engineer to rethink and rebuild their past experiences. And so in keeping with the 5 recommendations that we've got for all of you for building out a strong tech resume, one, again, clearly listing out technologies. My guess was right. This person was most proficient in Ruby on Rails, but remembering looking back at that resume, we saw that appear like one time hidden away at the back of one bullet point towards the bottom of that first experience section. 2 here, right? Quantification, quantifying being key. We can start to see that immediately now, right? Building this customer review system for 100,000 active accounts, over 100,000 active accounts, right? So we quantified through order of magnitude for this one. This one talking about track student customers through 6 major personal financial milestones, right? So building in some more quantification here, improving code review process by at least 50%, improving folks' ability to contribute to projects and maintaining 100% employee retention through solid mentoring. So we can see again, like really quantifying past experiences here. 3, knowing that relevant experience, very much paramount. Worked with this engineer to help clarify titling. Remember, if we looked back at that, what was it? Remote contract web application developer. How about just software engineer, right? Sometimes, you might end up in a role where the title doesn't exactly match the work that you're doing. Like, you're doing development work, but for example, in like a finance company, maybe you get the title of vice president. And for somebody outside of finance, maybe they don't understand like what that means. It's going to be confusing. So it's all right on your resume to use a title, especially if the title that you get does not exactly line up with the work that you're actually doing. Use a title that better describes the work that you're doing. Somebody asks for your exact title, you can still provide that to them, but at least in the purposes of your resume, to make it super clear to someone what your experience actually is, it's okay to just simplify title so it's not like a very long thing like this engineer had for this first role. If you remember before, they were like cofounder and consultant. Again, that also wasn't clear. Turns out they were the co-founder and they did all the software development. So making sure, again, super clear that they actually been spending this whole time programming. The other one that used to be called technical owner or something, worked with him to, again, clarify that. Technical project manager in this particular case, senior developer, lead software engineer. Another thing you'll note with this one too is that beforehand his resume, right, was going to 2 pages. So there's that fourth key item here, keeping everything to 1 page. We cut out experience that was very legacy and old. Usually as a starting point, you can think about it as like just listing out the last decade of experience. In this case, we kept a little bit more because we had some space for it. But everything, if you remember, from like 97 through 2003, just took that off his resume. If you wanted to keep it on his LinkedIn, he's more than welcome to do that. There's no like space limitation to your LinkedIn. You can have it, again, be a more complete history of your experience. But for your resume purposes, really trying to keep things as directed towards the new roles that we're applying for. And then as that last point, in terms of being specific, telling a story through your bullet points, you could see we did a lot here in terms of being much more clear on the work that he was doing in this role. So this one, like, how did he increase budgeting, app security, and reliability by building the user experience and user interface for OAuth bank connections, offloading storage of sensitive credentials to a third-party vendor, and doing all of that, right, with that action piece using JavaScript, React, and React hooks for state management. And so with all that in mind, we can see how this last resume here, in rewriting it for the senior engineer, captures those 5 key points that we've been talking about here, which is listing your technologies, quantifying things to the best of our ability, making sure that we have relevant experience, clear and easy to find on our resume, keeping things to 1 page to the best of our ability, and then just having specific bullet points that are following this task, action, result format that brings in some of the quantification that we're trying to do.
We have some more questions here in the chat. And actually, Tanvir's question, I feel like, has to do more with someone at the beginning of their career. They ask, these days, a lot of the companies ask to fill in information on their career portals where they have fields for work experience, but not for project experience. So as a fresher or someone who's like recently started in their career, if I want to include my project experience, what would you recommend? And actually, Archit asked a similar question. How can I mention my freelance work? Should I use self-employed or freelance? Because freelance sometimes seems a bit irrelevant.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. Freelance can seem a bit irrelevant. I'll answer that one first, and I'll come back to the other one after. For the freelance work, what you need to think about for that is the freelance work like your core experience? Is that like the core driver of your relevant experience at the moment? If it is, that should be under your professional experience section. And I would just put like software developer. If somebody asks, like, your goal is to get a conversation, right? You don't want to get filtered at the resume stage. So if somebody then asks you more questions on the phone about like the way that that role is like organized, then you will be talking about that. But at least you're actually having the conversation and talking about that, right? You're on the telephone speaking with them versus getting filtered out before you even got to that point. If, say, you've already got like work history and maybe like, and you're maybe even currently employed, but you do have freelance work that you do on the side because you enjoy doing it, then maybe it wouldn't be in the professional experience section, as that might confuse timeline here. And so you might have another section towards the bottom that you could call like project work or freelance work, and you could just list it out in there. To the piece around listing project, like how to demonstrate projects on your resume, I'm going to not share this one. If you look back at the after, for example, on, oh boy, that's not what I wanted to share. If you look back at the after for the, here we go, Bootcamp Resume, we have a whole section here for projects, right? So if you're in that particular position, it's really building out the project section on your resume. And then as it relates to like company portals and there not being a section for projects, I'd I don't know. I would probably hesitate on representing projects as professional experience. At the same time, as we've been talking about, recognize the need here to just have a phone conversation, right? Versus just getting filtered at the very beginning stages. So if you do decide you want to put project work into professional experience for the purpose of these online apps that don't have a section for project work, it'd be good not to misrepresent that if you do get a phone call that those experiences were in fact projects, right? If somebody's asking you about that, and then you might just tell them too, like, look, your system didn't have a place for me to put this, so this is how I did it. Any other questions here for me to answer, Richie, as we wrap things up for the evening?
Yeah, I know that we're coming to the end of our session here. We did actually just have one more question that we'll end on that came in by Prasanna. Uh, they asked, can I list the personal projects on the resume? Like, for example, I do not have a professional opportunity to work on niche skills, but I do have personal projects to learn and show that I can handle those skills. So actually, it sounds like that same exact question, right, that you had just answered, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think if the question there is, say you're doing like Java development by day, right? But you really want to be learning data science and you want to demonstrate that you've worked with like data related technologies before or even currently. Having like a project that you list out or maybe multiple projects that you list out that on your resume that showcase those skills, 100% you can do that. And I would definitely encourage that.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for joining us for this hour. Just wanted to, thank everyone for asking those awesome questions. And Zachary says, thank you guys. I got some good value out of this. Zachary, it's absolutely our pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us. And again, it's the evening on a Thursday, and you're here taking the time out trying to better your technical resume. And I want to salute you for that, congratulate you for that, and hope that we'll see you soon at an Outco info session. David, did you want to have the last word?
Um, yeah, just to encourage, if folks are interested in learning more about what we do or how we approach, helping people throughout like the entire interview process. Like obviously we just spent 50 minutes or so, like solid 50 minutes really diving into resumes here. Like that's just one part of what we do, right? And I could talk for hours about resumes and probably lose my voice. But again, that's like just one aspect of what we do. So if you're interested in learning more about other ways that we help support folks through the job search process, so that's like leveling up on your technical skills through improving your data structures and algorithms, coding here, or just like recognizing patterns so that you can get faster at solving questions at bigger tech companies. That's something that we help out with. Salary negotiation, that's actually something that I do for folks as well throughout the job search process. So how to get more money, which I think we all want to do. All right, another aspect of what we help support people on through the job search process. So if you're interested in learning more and meeting my co-founder, who's an entertaining person to watch speak, please do attend one of the info sessions. And if nothing else, though, being a part, joining into the Slack community that Richie's put together and monitors here, it's an opportunity to meet other job-seeking software engineers as well as learn more about other events that we're going to be hosting in the future.
Thank you all so much for your time, and I hope you have a lovely evening. You take care now. Bye.
Bye, everybody.